Have your Bibles, you can turn to near the end of the book of Job. We'll be reading Job chapter 38 and 39. Finally, there arrives in the book of Job one who speaks that needs no justification or explanation. Finally, the Lord speaks out of the whirlwind. You know, my most frequent prayer right before I come up to preach, Lord, let my brothers and sisters hear a better sermon than the one that they're going to hear, because they're listening to the pulpit above. Job chapter 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man, I will question you, and you make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurement? Surely you know. But who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? On who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far you shall come, no further. And here your proud ways be stayed. Have you commanded the morning since your days began? Caused the dawn to know its place? That it might take hold of the skirts of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? It is changed like clay under the seal, and its features stand out like a garment. From the wicked their light is broken, and their uplifted arm is broken. Have you entered the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? Where is the place of darkness, that you may take it to its territory, and that you may discern the path to its home? You know, for you were born then. The number of your days is great. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? What is the way to the place where light is distributed, or where the east wind is scattered upon the earth? Who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain, and a way for the thunderbolt to bring rain on a land where no man is, on the desert in which there is no man, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, to make the ground sprout with grass? As the rain of Father, who has begotten drops of dew, from whose womb did the ice come forth, and who has given birth to the frost of heaven? The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or loose the cords of the Orion? Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season, or can you guide the bear with its children? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens, and can you establish their rule on the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that a flood of waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings, that they may go and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inner parts or inward parts, or given understanding to the mind? Who can number the clouds by wisdom, or who can tilt the water skins of the heavens when the dust runs into a mass and the clods stick together? If this wasn't enough, Yahweh now turns to the natural creation of animals. Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens, or lie in wait in the thicket? Who provides for the raven its prey, when its young ones cry to God for help and wander about for lack of food? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the does? Can you number the month that they fulfill? And do you know the time when they give birth? When they crouch, bring forth their offspring, or delivered of their young? Their young ones become strong. They grow up in the open. They go out and do not return to them. Who has let the wild donkey go free? Who has loosed the bonds of the swift donkey, to whom I have given the arid plain for his home, and the salt land for his dwelling place? He scorns the tumult of the city. He hears not the shouts of the driver. He ranges the mountains as his pasture, and he searches after every green thing. Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? Can you bind him in the furrow with ropes, or will he harrow the valleys after you? Will you depend on him because his strength is great? Will you leave him to your labor? Do you have faith in him that he will return your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but are they the pinions and plumage of love? For she leaves her eggs to the earth, and it lets them be warmed on the ground, forgetting that a foot may crush them, that the wild beast may trample on them. She deals cruelly with her young, as if they were not hers, though her labor be in vain, yet she has no fear. This is my favorite image. Behold the stupid ostrich. I don't want any emails. I know the irony of preaching about a stupid ostrich mom on Mother's Day. Spare the emails. Look what he says. Because God has made her forget wisdom and given her no share in understanding. When she rouses herself to flee, she laughs at the horse and his rider. Do you give the horse his might? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? Do you make him leap like the locust? His majestic snorting is terrifying. He paws in the valley and exults in his strength. He goes out to meet the weapons. He laughs at fear and is not dismayed. He does not turn back from the sword. Upon him rattle the quiver, the flashing spear, and the javelin. With fierceness and rage he swallows the ground. He cannot stand still at the sound of the trumpet. When the trumpet sounds, he says, "Aha." He smells the battle from afar, the thunder of the captains and the shouting. Is it by your understanding that the hawk soars and spreads his wings toward the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up, makes his nest on high? On the rock he dwells and makes his home, on the rocky crag and stronghold. From there he spies out the prey. His eyes behold it from far away. His young ones suck up blood, and where the slain are, there he is. This is the word of the Lord. God, in the book of Job, finally speaks. But you might have noticed something while you are listening to these two chapters. You might have been saying to yourself, God seems to omit some things you thought he should say, and he says some things that you thought he should omit. And so throughout the ages, philosophers and writers throughout the centuries have been deeply disappointed at these words of Yahweh to Job. Carl Jung, the psychologist, called God a bully and asked this question: is it worth the lion's while to terrify the mouse? God has been called a divine blowhard, like shaking a rattle at a crying child in order to divert its attention from its hunger pains. Another writer says, as a mere argument, there's something lacking, perhaps, in saying to a man who's lost his money, his house, and his family, and is sitting on the dustbins all over with boils, look at the hippopotamus. God is deeply disappointing for some in his answer to Job. What does the wild ox, the mountain goat, the soaring eagle, storehouses of snow and hail, and this is my favorite, the stupidity of the ostrich, what has any of that to do with the central question in the book of Job? Job, why do the innocent suffer? God, where's the justice on this earth in the faith of trials and suffering? How does any of that make any sense to Job sitting on the dustbin, scraping himself with shards of broken glass? And so I want to suggest 3 different points to framework these 2 chapters: a beautiful encounter, a coherent answer, and a disruptive expectation. A beautiful encounter, a coherent answer, and a disruptive expectation. First of all, a beautiful, beautiful encounter. God is the God of encounter. Do you think that he had to show up for Job? In a time where suffering was supposedly a sign of God's deep displeasure, God actually speaks to Job. God actually shows up for a suffering child named Job. It's a beautiful encounter for a few different reasons. Let me give you three. Number one, it's a beautiful encounter because Job had doubted in his heart of hearts that God would ever speak. In chapter 9, verse 16, Job had said, "If I summoned him and he answered me, I would not believe that he was listening to my voice." And so that God speaks tells you, Job, he was listening all along. Job, he saw your heart. He saw your deepest hurt. He didn't turn his back from you in your moment of deepest sorrow, yet he saw you, he knew you, and he was listening all along. He was present all along in your hurt. In chapter 23, verses 8 and 9, Job had said, "But if I go to the east, he's not there. If I go to the west, I do not find him. When he is at work in the north, I do not see him. When he turns to the south, I catch no glimpse of him." You see, Job couldn't find God. But here's the message of the gospel. Job couldn't find God, but God finds Job. In his lowest moment in life, God finds and seeks out Job. God meets with Job, telling him implicitly that suffering, my child, is never a sign of rejection by the Almighty. He meets with Job, and it's a beautiful, beautiful encounter. Second, it's a beautiful encounter because God encountered Job with not what he wanted, but with what he most needed. Think of Job. Think of his complaints throughout the book of Job. What did Job want? Job wanted vindication, and he got reconciliation. Job wanted confrontation, and he got communion. He wanted a courtroom with God. God, sit on the stand. I'm going to ask you some questions. You're going to appear before me. Instead, he got the very presence of God. And isn't this also so like God? We want 1,000 different things from God. We want the blessings of God. We want the good life from God. We want the comfortable life from God. Yet what does God give us? He gives us his Son who dies on a cross for our sins, giving us not what we thought we wanted, but what we most truly needed from God. In a million years, we would have never said, you know, God, what I want from you is that your child would die on a cross for me. What I really need from you is the forgiveness of sins. No, we would have said to God, just give me what I deserve. Instead, God says, how about I give you grace? How about I give you mercy upon mercy? You didn't ask for it. You could have never imagined it. This is what I'm going to give to you. It's a beautiful encounter. Third, it's a beautiful encounter because Job, as you know, is in the midst of a storm. And God meets him in a storm. God meets Job in what biblical writers call a theophany. A what? A theophany, which is a visible manifestation of the very presence of God. When you look at the Bible, you're not counting on 20 or 30 or 40 fingers the theophanies in the Bible. You're thinking rarely of, maybe you're thinking of Moses meeting with God face to face at the top of Mount Sinai. You're thinking of Elijah. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11. It says, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven, completely taken out, never faced death. Met God in a whirlwind up to heaven. Prophet Ezekiel in chapter 1 could say he saw a stormy wind and a great cloud with brightness around it, flashing fire, bursting forth continually. You think of Peter, James, and John. Not even the other 9 disciples. Just 3 saw that Jesus transfigured on the Mount of transfiguration, the glory of God, the presence of God. And so don't you think, maybe like Job, maybe like me, when we suffer, we tend to think things like this: God, it feels like you're abandoning me. It feels like you're rejecting me. We feel that God is against us. That God shows us that couldn't be further from the truth. The gift that God gives suffering Job, he stands among Moses and Elijah and Ezekiel as some of the paragons of biblical faith and biblical heroes. And he does this to Job, who is suffering the dark night of the soul. Though Job didn't know the why, though Job didn't understand the cause, Job might still have the very presence of God. And maybe that was enough for Job. And maybe that's enough for you and for me. One writer says the common ground between Job and his friends was that he was cut off from God, and that his suffering was the evidence of all of that. Job gets God to speak to him. He understands that, in fact, he's not cut off from God, that God hasn't rejected us, hasn't turned his back, but was present the entire time. It's a beautiful encounter with a suffering child named Job. Beautiful encounter. Second, a coherent answer. Now, lots of interpreters have said something like this: don't pay attention so much to what God says. It's just enough that he shows up. Sort of like education by overwhelming, right? Robert Jansen says that Yahweh's questions can really be boiled down to three basic questions. Who are you? Where were you? And are you able? You get those? Who are you? Where were you? And are you able? And what is the only thing that Job can say implicitly? I am nothing. I was not there. And I am not able. In other words, only you were there, God. Only you are able, God. And only you are God. So that might provide a coherent enough answer, but I think we can grow deeper. It's not just an overwhelming display of power, yet a reasoned answer to Job's central questions. Look at stanza 1, verse 4 through 7 of chapter 38. This is how God begins. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. It's as if God steps back from his creation. This is the unbelievably beautiful creation. And it's all comes forth from my word. It's all my handiwork. This is like a proud father, proud creator, putting creation on display. On what were its bases sung? Or who laid its cornerstone? And this is the culmination, verse 7. When the morning stars sang together. A few weeks ago, what are the stars symbolic of in Scripture often? You weren't paying attention 2 weeks ago. I'll forgive you. I'll forgive you this time. The angels, right? When the morning stars, the angels sang together. All the sons of God shouted for joy. It's a beautiful, beautiful creation, God is saying. But Job has said, I'm not so sure. Right? The way God has governed the universe doesn't seem beautiful, doesn't seem fair, and it seems like the presence of evil has wrecked and ruined God's good creation, because it's not good for me, and it's not good for many of us who are suffering the way his Creator has set up the world. And so God continues. What does he say in verse 8 through 11? He says, Or who shut the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment, thick darkness its swaddling band, prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, Thus far you shall come, and no further. Here your proud waves be stayed. He's talking about the sea. Do you understand how God is giving a coherent answer to Job? And you say, not really. What's he doing? He's talking about the sea. Right. So, and the sea in biblical imagery is always a sign of evil and chaos. Remember Revelation chapter 21. What does John say? there is a new heaven and a new earth. But what's the one thing he doesn't see in the new heaven and the new earth? And there was no more sea. In other words, evil is completely defeated. Chaos completely subdued. It's not just that, John was anti-sailing. He was like, had enough of fishing. I want to see that. No, this is a symbol of evil and chaos. And so now notice what God says about the sea in verse 8 and 11. Who shut the doors of the sea when it burst open from the womb? When I made its clouds its garment, thick darkness its swaddling band. This sea, God is saying, this symbol of evil, I treat like a little baby. I've given it its garments. I'm giving it its swaddling clothes. Then he says this, and prescribed limits for it, set bars and doors, and said, thus far you shall come and no further. Here your proud waves shall be stayed. In other words, evil has a prescribed limit, Job. Just like when the waves come here and no further. Like a toddler bursting forth from the womb, making life difficult for parents. Can we be honest? But God says, no, I got a playpen for this rambunctious toddler. I got a baby gate so it can't fall down the stairs. I have a car seat to strap in this toddler when we leave the house. Job, the raging sea might seem out of control and terribly threatening to you, but I've prescribed exactly where it goes and exactly what it does. It's working within the area that I've confined to it. Job, the waters of the sea have limits. They bump against the coast. They bump against the cliffs of places like Scotland. They only go where God has told them they can go, and so too with evil. In God's good creation, there are no evil forces beyond Yahweh's control. Job, did you doubt this? Did you not understand this? Even in creation filled with evil, my creation is still beautiful and in order. The rest of chapter 38, Yahweh tells Job that he alone commands the light in the darkness, that he alone knows the place of the dead, that he alone knows the storehouses of snow and hail, these symbols of judgment that God often gives in the Old Testament. All of these threatening things of creation, God is in control as the creator God. And then in chapter 39, Yahweh turns to the natural world of animals. The lion, the mountain goat, the wild donkey, the wild ox, the stupid ostrich, yes, I said it, the horse of war, the soaring hawk, and the eagle that makes his nest on high. What do you notice about all of these creatures? Except for the war horse, which is described in fierce and terrifying terms. With fierceness and rage, he swallows the ground. His majestic snorting is terrifying. Except for this war horse, all of these animals are not domesticated farm animals that Job could have tamed on his farm. Yahweh doesn't highlight, little chickens that you can build a coop for, take their eggs, but rather hawks and eagles that mount up and soar. Yahweh isn't describing, sorry pet lovers, a little cat that you can pet, maybe a little golden retrieval poodle mix, a hamster. By the way, Carters are looking to get rid of a hamster. Please come after the service. That you can put under a cage and have it smell. And, your kids don't listen when you say, why don't you guys clean the cage? They never do that. So he doesn't say all that, right? He's highlighting the lion, the mountain goat, the wild donkey. These are wild creatures. They're beyond human control. Job, if you take a moment to venture outside of your little farm, things are wild. And things are out of your control. And yet, who knows the most intimate comings and goings of these wild beasts? God alone. God, Job, don't you think that if God knows all the most intimate details of all these wild beasts in creation, he also knows how to control evil in our world? When you look out in the world, do you sometimes say to yourself, I wonder if anyone really is keeping score? If it feels like evil is bursting out of its limit, there's no justice in the world. God might say to you the very same thing he told Job. Look at Job 39, verses 1 through 4. We'll just talk about the mountain goat. Because if I took you through the whole tour, we'd be here till 12 o'clock. Some of you are like, yeah, I'd really love to stay till 12 o'clock. I know you're the saints, but I'll go for everybody else. 1 through 4. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Verse 2. Can you number the months that they fulfill? Do you know the time when they give birth? The big question is when? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Can you number the months that they fulfill of pregnancy? Do you know the time when they give birth? Job doesn't know the time. And Job can't fathom when these things might possibly take place. But God knows. God knows the time when these wild creatures give birth. And so when the psalmist prays, when the psalmist laments, how long, O Lord? How long? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? The psalmist knows that the psalmist is praying to the God who knows how long. Yahweh is the Lord of time. Yahweh alone knows how long the trial will last, how long the suffering will last, how long the evil will last. God rules the rhythms of our world and the rhythms of our lives. Nothing is beyond his sovereign knowledge, and nothing is beyond his sovereign will, even evil. And so is this a coherent answer to Job? I think it is. What does God seem to be saying? Let me put this poetry into prose and say it like this. Maybe God is saying something like this to Job. Job, if you can't understand the physical universe, what makes you think you can understand the spiritual universe? Job, don't you know that evil has a prescribed limit? And this limit is prescribed by God alone? Job, don't you know that even the wildness of creation is beautiful because God is in charge and God is sovereign and God is in control? Job, don't you see these wild creatures are marvelous and mysterious? Can't you begin to understand that God who made these wild creatures is no less marvelous and no less mysterious than they? So what do you think Job learns? He learns that God has evil under his sovereign control. He learns that God sets a limit of man's suffering and trials this far and no further. He learns that if God possesses the most intimate knowledge of wild creatures, surely he also has the most intimate knowledge of the wild evil that threatens our lives and threatens our world. In short, Job learns to surrender to the inscrutable purposes of God. He learns that if God is to be trusted at all, he's also to be trusted in the suffering and the trials of our lives, and especially so then. Charles Spurgeon, many years ago, said that God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. And he says, when you can't trace his hand, and you have no idea what God is doing, when you can't trace his hand, you can trust his heart. Congregation, can you trust the heart of God, even in the hard places in life? God gives a beautiful encounter, coherent answer, and third, a disruptive expectation. A disruptive expectation. What do I mean by that? What did all the characters in Job expect when God finally answers? Job expected, many chapters complain, what I most want is vindication. A definitive declaration of my innocence. If you appear before me, God, you better declare and vindicate me. I am innocent of all of my suffering. Well, the three friends expected exactly the opposite. They expected accusation, perhaps a thunderbolt to Job for all of his hidden sins. But I could ask you the very same question. What did you expect in God's answer to Job? What did you expect? Did you expect an intellectual response from God? Did you expect God to justify himself and explain his ways to man? Did you expect God to apologize to Job for his unjust singling out of this one man? What did you expect God to say? Let me suggest that how you answer that question might tell you a lot about your own view of God. Are we people who demand an answer from God? Are we that entitled? Do we say, God, you better justify your ways before me? God, I deserve an answer. And we might need, like Job, to encounter the very presence of God. To stand mute before God. To stand in awe of the Creator. To recognize how little we know of the vastness of God. To recognize we know just a tiny, small, minuscule fraction of who God is in all of his glory, and all of his majesty, and all of his greatness. Would we be people that say, God, you stand before me. You answer me. Am I going to be the believer that's that entitled? And God speaks to me. And so God leads Job out into creation. It's as if God takes Job to the top of the Himalayas, Mount Everest, or maybe at the edge of the Grand Canyon, and says to Job, Job, as far as you can see, I made all of this. I'm the Creator God. You see, if self is big and God is small, then by all means, God better answer you. But if God is big and self is small, and maybe like Job, we slowly begin to realize that surrender is truly the only way to live before this God. So God is a God who often disrupts our expectations. Aren't you glad that's the case? Aren't you glad that when you say, God, you owe me, you better give me exactly what I deserve. That God says to you, you don't want that. In fact, I'm going to give you grace when you least expect it. I'm going to give you mercy upon mercy. You couldn't even imagine it or conceive it. I'm going to give you my son, Jesus, who sheds his blood on a cross for you and your salvation. Though you were at war against me, this is the mind of God. He disrupts all our expectations about who God is. He's always better. He's always more good than we ever think that God is possible. Let me close with this. One commentator says, it might be possible to imagine a divine speech more brusque or more brief or else more defensive than this one. But it is not possible to imagine a speech more worthy of its speaker. Friends, God is the Creator God who disrupts all of our expectations because our knowledge of God is always and forever will be too small. Think about that this Mother's Day. Let's pray.